am the world's biggest Metroid fan. I am such a fan that when Metroid Prime 4 got delayed, I cried for 87 hours straight. Beat that. So with that game seemingly nowhere in sight, I decided it is now time to rank every Metroid game from worst to best. I should note though that I'm only going to talk about the mainline games because I simply haven't played the spin-offs that much. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the rankings. At number 12 on this list is the very first Metroid game that started it all. Some of you might ask, how on earth could you rank this iconic piece of video game memorabilia so low? Well, to them I ask, have you played it recently? Metroid on the NES has just straight up not aged well. I've tried to beat it multiple times, and now I just have no desire to do it. Even if I was alive in 1986 and played this game, I don't know if I would enjoy it. Truthfully, I don't know how many of you old people played games back in the 80s, because in Metroid, there is no map, there is no indication of where to go, just nothing. You're thrown into this alien world, and you're left with a completely blank slate of what to do. There's no denying that Metroid is a very important game since it is the one that started the franchise to begin with, but you really don't need to play it today. There's a much better remake that came out in the 2000s, which I'll get to in a bit, so it's really just made Metroid on the NES kind of pointless to play. Moving on to number 11 on the list, this should come as not a huge surprise, Metroid Other M. Now I understand, there's quite a lot of people that have come up these past few years who say they actually love Metroid Other M, they really think it is an overhated game, and I am not one of those people. I despise Other M. It is a game I've gone back to maybe twice in the past decade, and I don't plan on going back again. First, I'll go into some positives. The cutscenes look nice. The animations of Samus look really good. That's it. Many people have gone over the story and how horrendous it is and how it just completely disrespects Samus as a character and all that stuff, but I'm not going to get too much into that because it's been said over and over again. What I really want to talk about though is that control scheme. One Wii remote. Really? This could have been a decent sort of combat action game similar to Bayonetta, but it stinks that it's restricted to just the Wii remote on its side. It is so awkward playing this game on just a D-pad with a few buttons and motion controls. And to top it all off, even though it's called Metroid, it doesn't really feel like a Metroid game. It's very linear through and through. It's not really until after the credits and you go back to the station that the game is set on that it becomes somewhat like a Metroid game where you can backtrack, find stuff you missed the first time, all that stuff. But the fact that Samus already has all her gear, but she can only activate them if Adam tells her. Unforgivable. Just no. And don't even get me started on those awful detective sections where you're stuck standing still until you find the exact pixel you need to progress forward. Ugh. I'm sorry, I don't like Other M. It's still more playable than the first Metroid game, but that's about it. It's just playable. Moving on. Coming in at number 10 on the list is Metroid Prime Hunters, which was a great showpiece for the Nintendo DS and what it could do. These graphics may not look that great today, but back in 2006, it looked great for running on a handheld console. Using the touchscreen, the aim took some getting used to, but it was still feasible, and it made for some incredibly fun online play with friends. At least that's what I've been told. I could never get my DS to hook up to the Wi-Fi for some reason, so I really just played with bots every now and then. But there is a single player mode because it is a Metroid game, and it's forgettable at best. It had a really cool concept with Samus running into and fighting other bounty hunters. But other than that, the planets you visit don't really have much exploration to them, and the main collectibles you get are just the beams from the other bounty hunters. And they don't really look that interesting, they just change the color of Samus's gun. That's really about it. But I think its biggest crime is that it repeats a lot of the same bosses. Truthfully, other than the final boss, there's really only 3 of them that repeat over and over and over again. It's so exhausting. In that sense, Hunters doesn't feel as much like a Metroid Prime game as much as it does a tech demo for the DS. Very impressive tech, kind of a forgettable game. Next we have number 9, that being Metroid 2 Return of Samus. I am actually kind of surprised that it's ranked this high above Hunters and above Other M, because much like Metroid on the NES, I don't feel like this game has aged that well either. Once again, there's no map, so you really just don't know where to go, but it does have a pretty cool premise of Samus having to go kill all these Metroids on planet SR388, so you're coming across all these powerful Metroids to battle, and from what I recall, this game does a better job at placing you on the right path path. You don't come across too many branching paths, so you always know where to go, which is down pretty much. Also, the power-ups like the spider ball are really intuitive. Just being able to crawl across walls is really interesting on its own. Truthfully, I have never beaten Metroid 2, but I feel like I've played enough of it to gather an opinion on it. And while I think it's more of a Metroid game than Prime Hunters and Other M, I still think it has the problem of Metroid NES in that it still is really hard to pick up nowadays, thanks to there being no map and the environments looking really similar to one another, especially if you're playing in black and white. I actually haven't tried this out on Switch. I think the Switch version has color in it, so maybe I should revisit this again? I'm not sure, but why would I do that when I have a 3DS and a copy of Metroid Samus Returns, which, oh, look at that! It's number 8 on our list. What do you know? This is, without a doubt, the best way to experience Metroid 2, mostly for two reasons. A, there's a map, and B, there's a lot of color. All these areas look quite distinct on their own, especially when you turn on that 3D on the 3DS, and it just pops. It visually, literally pops in your face with those 3 dimensions. This is also the first Metroid game by Mercury Steam, and they're the ones who introduced melee counters into 2D Metroid, something that was greatly improved upon in Metroid Dread, which we'll get to much later. Overall, it's a great 2D Metroid experience with everything we love about Metroid, from the item pickups to the gear that lets you access areas you couldn't have before. That said, it's only number 8 on my list because there's a lot of the same repeat bosses, because let's face it, a lot of the bosses in this are Metroids, but the unique ones that aren't Metroids just don't feel that interesting. Like that one robot I forget the name of, that Queen Metroid. Okay, Ridley at the end though, hot take, I actually liked that. I really liked that they added Ridley at the end of the game. That final boss I felt like was epic. When the baby just came in and started attacking him, I was like getting goosebumps. I thought it was really cool. Now for number 7, being Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. I love revisiting this game, I really do. I have a lot of fond memories with it. I actually remember the weekend I got this game when I was in middle school. I fell off my scooter and sprained my left arm really bad, which was not great because I had to use my left arm for that grapple whip, and it was so painful every single time. Still, it didn't take away from how much I absolutely love Metroid Prime 3. The graphics in this game are extraordinary, even to this day. It really pushed the Wii to its absolute limits, which made for some gorgeous and incredibly vast locales like Brio and Skytown in Elysia. We don't talk enough about how beautiful Elysia is. We failed as a society. This game focused a lot on story too, with quite a bit of voice acting from characters like the bounty hunters, which were really cool at the beginning, and then they turned bad, and then you had to kill them. That said, when I view this game objectively, it is the weakest of the Metroid Prime trilogy, even though it's still really good, but it was definitely trying to compete with another sci-fi first-person game that starts with an H and ends with an ALO. Yeah, even though it wasn't exactly a first-person military game, there were quite a few sections filled with a lot of first-person military shooting. It wasn't the focus of Prime 3, but it took up quite a bit to where you could tell they were trying to capture some of what made Halo special back then. Metroid Prime 3 was very much trying to be something that it wasn't. So in that sense, it focused a bit too much on combat, even though there's still plenty of exploration to be had. In fact, after the first hour, the game really opens up to that good old-fashioned Metroid exploration that we know and love. As I stated earlier, the environments are captivating to explore, with each planet having their own unique history and creatures. There are still a lot of combat sections that are made easier with the Hyper Mode, which enhances Samus's weaponry with Phazon, but they're not so overwhelming to where they detract from the classic Metroid exploration and puzzles. And a lot of people complain about the motion controls, but honestly, they're really not that bad. Gimmicky, yes, but there are not nearly as many motion-controlled gimmicks as there were in Skyward Sword. I understand that hinders accessibility for some people, so hopefully this game gets re-released on a more popular platform that starts with an S and ends with a witch, but if you have the means to play Metroid Prime 3, you absolutely should. So even though Metroid Prime 3 may not be the best of the trilogy, it's still one of my absolute favorites. Moving on to number 6, Metroid Zero Mission, the remake of Metroid NES. It's a far superior version because, again, it has a map and it has a lot of color, baby. So much color, my eyes are bleeding. That said, I like this game, but I don't love it as much as others seem to. I remember the first time I played it, and I played it pretty late in life, and when I was done with it, I was like, oh, that was it? That was really quick. I wasn't even trying to speedrun it. Zero Mission overall just feels like a more faster-paced Metroid game, probably due to the fact that Samus moves really fast and the music is blaring really fast too. It just all feels so fast, if that makes sense. But there are still some iconic battles here, like with Kraid, Ridley, and that giant bumblebee thing I forget the name of, and they also added some more story elements. It's not enough to just beat Mother Brain this time. Next thing Samus knows, her ship gets shot down and she has to sneak into a space pirate ship in her Zero suit, with only her beam able to stun enemies, not kill them. It was an interesting concept, and it ended with her getting her suit back and just completely going John Wick on every space pirate, including Mecha Ridley, and then leaving the planet. So even though I don't love Zero Mission as much as other people do, I can recognize that it is still a certified banger. It works a lot like Metroid Fusion, a game we'll talk about much later, in which the player is guided by map markers, but it doesn't tell you how to get to those destinations, which is already more helpful than the original Metroid, which just didn't tell you anything at all. It also greatly enhances the boss battles, even adding a few of them like that giant bumblebee moth, whatever it's called, and it's just darn fun to play, copying the same control scheme as Metroid Fusion, thus making it a great 2D Metroid experience. Now here we are at the top 5 Metroid games of all time, at least according to me, but number 5 has to be Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Ironically, this was my first Metroid game. I just saw it at Target and I'm like, okay, I'll get this. I didn't notice the big fat 2. I probably did and I just didn't care. Either way, Metroid Prime 2 is a solid follow-up to Metroid Prime. A lot of people say that it's actually better than Metroid Prime. I'm not one of those people. I feel like the Dark Aether aspect of it kind of brought it down for me a little bit. You just lose health over time, and I just don't really like that in video games. I like to explore areas as much as I can in Metroid games, and that I felt was just kind of unnecessarily punishing. It gets better, of course, when you get the Dark Suit and the Light Suit, the latter of which just makes you completely invincible, but when you do get that Light Suit, you have to go through an annoying endgame fetch quest where you have to find the Sky Temple keys, and it is just frankly annoying. You can't even find most of them until you get the Light Suit, which is the very last thing you collect, and it's just, ugh. That said, I do understand people who consider this their favorite Metroid game because it is still exceptional in its bosses, its gameplay, its music. The Torvis Bog theme is just life-changing. I always bring it up whenever I talk about Metroid Prime 2 because it is that good. And the boss battles here, of course, have the quality and the quantity, so many memorable ones. A few of them look similar, like the Guardian bosses, but that Boost Ball Guardian, man, what a very tough boss battle. I can handle it now, but back when I was a little child, I was very frustrated by this boss. But let's not forget about Quadraxis the goat with 4 legs. Oh, I'll also agree that the map layout in this game is far better than that of Metroid Prime's. I felt like the backtracking in Prime 1 was a little bit annoying, but it's improved here in Prime 2. So yeah, Prime 2 is a really good follow-up. Doesn't reinvent the wheel like Metroid Prime did, but it's still great in its own right. So much so that it's in the top 5 Metroid games of all time, at least according to me. Now for number 4, that being the iconic Super Metroid. I consider this to be the first true Metroid game, the first game that really established what the series would become for the next 30 years. It's far more readable than Metroid 1 and 2, and it includes a map, so that's already a huge plus in my book. By far the greatest strength of Super Metroid to me is its atmosphere. There was really nothing like it at the time. The cover of the game makes it look like it's a sci-fi action game, and yes, it is, but it begins slow and somber. It's quiet. The music is eerie, and this continues throughout the game. It really made the player feel like a fish out of water, like they weren't supposed to be here. And even though there is a map, it's not like it tells you exactly where to go. It just gives you an idea of where you can't go. And that's also what I liked about Super Metroid, is that it still placed you on a pretty linear path at first, but then it really opened up as you collected more gear, which is of course the classic Metroid gameplay, but I feel it's better established here than it was in the first 2 games. The only thing that holds it back from being number 1 in this day and age are the controls. They're very floaty, I should say. The platforming doesn't feel as precise, wall jumping feels very awkward, it doesn't really hold up in this day and age. It's weird that I used to say we don't need a Super Metroid remake, this game is perfect as is, but now after playing games like Dread and Metroid Fusion, I'm just like, okay, maybe there's a case to be made here. Even still, despite the control issues, Super Metroid is still number 4 on my list, and that's saying a lot. But what about number 3? What's number 3 on my list? What could it be? Easy. Metroid Fusion. Fusion is an interesting game to me because it is a more guided experience than Super Metroid. Samus's computer Adam tells her where to go at all times, so there's some level of hand-holding here, but even still, it doesn't tell you how to get to those waypoints, so you still have to figure out what to do in that regard. What impresses me about Fusion is its ability to balance action, exploration, and just straight up horror. I wouldn't necessarily classify Metroid Fusion as a horror game, but there are some parts here that really make you tense up, namely anything involving her evil clone, the SAX. You literally cannot fight this thing until the very end because it is that powerful. And there are some chase sequences in the game where you're trying to run away from her until she just loses interest and continues exploring the rest of the facility. That and the story is genuinely interesting. This is the first game where the X-Parasites come into play, which are just absolutely deadly foes who take forms of anything they come into contact with, and they have the potential to just completely destroy the galaxy. Even without the evil clone of Samus, that is just scary in and of itself. Almost as scary as Ridley's screams. Yeah, the boss battles in Fusion are just simply iconic, each with their own unique arenas and characteristics. The boss battle Ferris is set in a flooded arena. There's also a corrupted war machine that you can only battle by hanging on to some monkey bars. I'm also impressed with the setting of the BSL research station, because Metroid games are normally set on planets, but they somehow made being set on a man-made research vessel absolutely captivating by including different biomes that are supposed to replicate planet SR388's atmosphere. It's because of all this that many people consider Metroid Fusion to be one of the best Metroid games and quite possibly the best 2D game. I even thought this for a bit until I played number 2, Metroid Dread. And I can hear you all now, recency bias, but stay with me here. When I played this game, it changed my life, and I'm being very dramatic, but stay with me here once again. The first minute I was playing Metroid Dread, I was already shocked at how much fun I was having. Samus controls like a dream. She can slide, she can easily bounce off walls, she can kick foes' butts with her bare hands and feet. On second thought, maybe Super Metroid does need a remake because these controls are just too darn good. They're made even better in the boss battles that give her opportunities to take her newfound mobility to greater heights. And she gets even more Aeon abilities like the Flash Shift, which turns her quite literally into the Flash during intense battles. So yeah, the game plays like a dream, but it also looks incredible. Even though it's set on a 2D plane, they managed to create environments that were absolutely breathtaking. Don't believe me? Watch the Metroid Dread Accolades trailer that I'm in, son. That's right, I'm in a Metroid trailer. I know what I'm talking about. It also included similar foes to the SAX, those being the Emmy robots, so they somehow managed to replicate some of Metroid Fusion's horror into this game. And of course the X-Parasites are back, just absolutely terrifying dudes. And the story was so significant in that we finally got to meet the Chozo race who raised Samus and made her a bounty hunter. It was so cool seeing them, hearing them talk in their language, and fighting one at the very end. Spoiler alert, I guess. And fighting one at the very end. This also concluded the story arc between Samus and the Metroids. What more is there to say? Metroid Dread is just an iconic game. I really think that it perfected 2D Metroid, and I can't wait to see what developer Mercury Steam does with the next 2D Metroid game, because you know, Dread became the best-selling Metroid game of all time. There's clearly gonna be another 2D Metroid. I am so excited. Now, I think you and I both know where this is going from here. The number one Metroid game, to me at least, is Metroid Prime. This game brought Metroid into 3D, and the development team at Retro Studios achieved this with flying colors. And that was that it was set in the first-person perspective, which was frankly unexpected. But they took advantage of this perspective with the scan visor that would reveal all kinds of information about the planet Talon 4, as well as the space pirates and their history with Samus herself. This perspective also made boss battles just a lot more epic as you're fighting these giant creatures, dodging their attacks and piling them with missiles, all the while you're feeling overwhelmed by their gargantuan sizes. Not to mention, when it came out in 2002, this was one of the best looking games, not just on GameCube, but of all time. Even today, it still looks fantastic. But now we have Metroid Prime Remastered, which to me is just the best way to play it. I honestly can't go back to the original Metroid Prime anymore because Prime Remastered just makes things so much better with its new dual stick control scheme and those upgraded HD visuals that still retain that same atmosphere and style of the original game. Sure, I have a few issues with the backtracking, or should I say back and forth tracking, as well as how the Chozo artifacts are placed, but those don't bring down the overall experience of Metroid Prime that much. This game is iconic. It is impactful not just for the Metroid series, but for game development as a whole. So many people have taken inspiration from Metroid Prime, and rightfully so. It made exploration rewarding. It included some intuitive puzzles, not to mention it was just a technical achievement across the board. So there you have it. Metroid Prime / Metroid Prime Remastered is my favorite Metroid game of all time. And hopefully, Metroid Prime 4 somehow finds a way to top that. I think it's possible because if Metroid Dread could dethrone Metroid Fusion 2 years ago, the same is possible for Prime 4. At the very least, I hope Prime 4 winds up in the top 3 Metroid games for me at least, but I guess we'll find out whenever that game comes out. It's been 5 years, it can't be that much longer, right?